Hi, my name is Brittany Shields, and this is my Legal Aspects of Teacher Evaluation presentation. This all begins sort of recently in the Every Student Succeeds Act when that was passed. That act ended the federal government's involvement in teacher evaluation. It permits states to redesign their accountability systems, and it also includes requiring states to have goals that have a range of factors, not just test scores. So those are some of the basics of how evaluation started to change. When evaluation started to change, we started to see more lawsuits. For example, the Florida Education Association had a lawsuit against Florida saying it had an unfair use of the school-wide growth formula. So for example, students on a math assessment using that growth on a PE teacher or an art teacher, using that school-wide data. And they won that lawsuit. There was also one that they had where merit pay and how that conflicts with bargaining wages, like with teachers' unions and their use of bargaining. They lost that one. The Tennessee Education Association also looked at school-wide growth and how it was they said it was unfair to use that with all teachers, and that case was dismissed. And then there was another example of the Houston Federation of Teachers, and they said there wasn't enough language to constitute what student growth was, and that one is currently in progress. So as you can see, as these things begin to change, a lot of teachers' unions start to look at how fair, unfair these things are being used with teachers. So when we think of teacher evaluations, the purpose is to provide feedback to teachers and to drive professional development. That's ideally. In the past, that's been through observations, checklists, rubrics, looking at student work, lesson plans, kind of the day-to-day of teachers. Some changes to the system that we've seen recently is, or the reason for these changes is we've had a lot of research on teacher quality. We've had a lot of groups that are really advocating for boosting teacher effectiveness. There's been some revamp to the state laws and just what to do with poorly performing teachers and how those affect schools. So some of those factors we see in like a Stanford study where they showed that a good teacher has students that have growth of more than a grade's worth, and poor teachers generally have about half a grade's worth of growth. So you can see a half a year versus a full year or more growth makes a difference. There was a 2009 report from the New Teacher Project, or what was formerly known as the New Teacher Project. And of the teachers that it studied, 99% of the teachers that they studied all ranked satisfactory. And so I think that report is saying most teachers sort of just receive satisfactory because that's just what we do. We have evaluations, they get their check mark, and they move on. And they also found that teachers with tenure are almost never fired, and that's a little concerning. Race to the Top was a government initiative where they provided grant money for school districts to implement 3 levels of performance, and that also included how students performed on state assessments and things. So there was a big push in schools to get that money. And then Bill Gates had a teacher quality initiative where he was giving money away if you improved teacher evaluation. Some of the changes that we see to evaluations are they're a little more heavily weighted on observations and tying those to good teaching practices and standards. I can see in my district the importance of frequent walkthroughs, and now those aren't necessarily tied to their evaluation, but that is tied to the feedback that they receive before an evaluation. There's a push for things to be less subjective, like where you're not thinking about feelings, but more data-wise. So that's why there's a push for using student work or student test scores, because that's less subjective. And really looking at growth and the teacher's contribution to learning. How much student growth are we seeing with a teacher? Now, this is where the teachers' unions start to get involved, and we have those lawsuits that, like what we've seen. Teachers' unions remain very wary of connecting pay with standardized test scores. For one, the reliability of those test scores. It's one test, one day, and students don't always perform well on those. And then taking into account the types of students that are taking these tests. A teacher that might teach special needs kids or have a high number of low income or maybe a volatile home life, or some of those factors not being able to contribute those factors to test scores. And then also just how that promotes kind of teaching to the test, promoting that instead of promoting learning, we're promoting students to be able to perform on a test. And teachers' unions also see this as just really a tax on teachers and their livelihood. Is there any evidence that these are useful? There have been some studies that show that teachers that have high quality feedback have better student performance. And then there's been some research on that teachers have improved their evaluations from year to year if they're really on the edge of dismissal or if they're on the edge of receiving a bonus. So not a lot of research has done on new systems of teacher evaluation. That kind of remains to be seen. But thinking about focusing more on student learning is exciting as a teacher and hopefully future administrator.